Hey friends, it's Corey from Hey Let's Make Stuff, and in today's video I am talking heat press hacks, tips, and tricks. This video is another double header, so you may have found your way here from Angie Holden's video where she talks all about her favorite heat press tips and tricks, and now I'm going to share my 5 tips and tricks. If you didn't come here from Angie Holden's video, but you do want to watch it, this video will redirect at the end so you can watch her video as well. If you're here for the live premiere, welcome. I'm so glad you're here. We are over in the chat, chatting away, talking about heat presses. If you have any questions or you want to share your own tips and tricks, we would love to hear them. Today, I am using my trusty Walla press from Heat Transfer Warehouse, but the tips and tricks here can be applied to basically any heat press that you have, and they might even apply to some mug presses, tumbler presses, or other specialty presses you might have. First up is a tip more than a hack. So I've had this press for probably 2 years now, and it's starting to squeak. So I'm gonna grab this here. I don't know if you can hear that, but I've been making a lot of presses and that little squeak is starting to drive me crazy. So my first tip is that you can oil the hinges in your press. So I've not actually greased my heat press before. This will be a first. We're gonna hope that it works. I'm using a white lithium premium grade. It's called Pro Grease. This is what was recommended by a lot of different people, so I went ahead and got it. And basically, I'm just going to oil the hinges on this to see if I can stop that squeak. All right, I went ahead and greased all the hinges that I thought could be causing that really annoying squeak. And this was a little messier than I was expecting, so I'm really glad I had this paper towel on hand. I went ahead and closed my heat press a bunch of times to really get that grease into those hinges. And then I cleaned up any excess grease around all of those little hinges using a paper towel. But now you can see, it's not squeaking anymore. Oh my God, so much better. I had been pressing a whole bunch of things the other day and that squeak was really getting to me, so I'm very glad that I tried to grease my heat press. I think this will help keep it running even longer. All right, I went ahead and turned my heat press on. I set it to 325 for 30 seconds. That is for one of the hacks that's coming up, but I wanted to give this a chance to heat up. And in the meantime, I want to talk about pressing papers when it comes to a heat press. Here on my table, I have 3 options. I have a Teflon sheet, I've got a piece of uncoated butcher paper, and I've got a parchment sheet. So which of these should you use for your particular type of project? So if you work with HTV, iron-on, then a Teflon sheet is definitely the way to go. It will not stick to your carrier sheet and it will give you really good results, and it will protect the top of your press from any errant adhesives and those sorts of things. You can actually buy platen covers made of Teflon. So they're basically like a cover that covers the top of your heat press here, so that when you press your project, you don't have to go and put this Teflon sheet on every single time when you're making your projects. It's not necessary, but it does speed up the process a little bit. If you're doing sublimation, I recommend uncoated butcher paper. I see a lot of people using Teflon with sublimation, but I definitely don't recommend it. It can trap moisture, which can really mess with your sublimation image. And if your sublimation ink blows through and ends up on this Teflon sheet, you gotta throw it in the trash, and that is such a waste. So if you're doing sublimation, I highly recommend the uncoated butcher paper. You can reuse it if you don't see any ink on there, but if you do see any ink blow out onto the sublimation paper, it's into the recycling bin. Butcher paper comes in rolls, which is what most people use. I really like it in sheets. I find it just so much easier to work with in my heat press. And then there's parchment paper, which a lot of people ask about. Sometimes people think butcher paper and parchment paper are the same thing, but they're not. Butcher paper is uncoated. Parchment paper actually has a very, very thin silicone coating, which makes it really good for like baking cookies. But it's not so good for pressing your projects, so I generally avoid it for that. That being said, I always have parchment paper in my craft room because I like to use it underneath both vinyl and iron-on decals to get perfect placement. So I'm gonna show you what I mean here. All right, so here I have a t-shirt decal, not one I would normally put on a shirt, but I am working on a video about how to use several different t-shirt rulers. And this was a trick that I found worked really well, in particular for aligning your decal on a shirt. So instead of putting this straight down on the shirt, I've put a piece of parchment under here, and you can see that this just does not stick to each other, right? So that makes it very easy for me to move this decal around exactly where I want it. So if I have my t-shirt ruler here, which I'm gonna line up, and don't worry, I will show you how to use this in another video, but I'm gonna go ahead and line it up here, just like this. And then I put this other piece on here. Now, moving this decal underneath this, while this is attached to the shirt, can be very difficult, but on the parchment paper, it becomes very easy to move. So if I wanted to align my decal here, I would find exactly where I want to put it, just like this. It makes it very easy to move around. I make sure that all my measurements are lined up perfectly. I'll show you how to do this in another video, but let's say this is where we want it. We can then add a few pieces of painter's tape up here at the top, just like this. We can remove the ruler, and then we can easily slide this out, and our decal is exactly where we need it when we go to put it in our heat press. Next week, I am going to have a video on how to use 4 different types of t-shirt rulers, so if I piqued your interest a little bit there, make sure to watch next week. Tip number 3 is how to set the pressure on your heat press. So most consumer level heat presses, so these are not professional level heat presses, don't have a pressure gauge. And so when you see a project that requires light, medium, or heavy pressure, you may be like, what does that mean? Which is a totally good question. I mean, you don't really know. So here is a trick for being able to figure out the pressure for your heat press. First up is light pressure. So you can grab a piece of copy paper, and we'll put it in the press here. I'll stand up, and I'll close this. You should still, with light pressure, be able to pull out that piece of paper. If you can't pull it out, just adjust that knob until you can pull it out. You don't want it to come out really easily. You do want to actually have to pull it a little bit, but you should be able to pull it out for light pressure. For medium pressure, start at that same light pressure and then give the crank just 2 good cranks, not all the way around, just 1, 2. And that should get you pretty close to medium pressure. You don't want to be able to pull the paper out with medium pressure, and you don't want to have to require all of your strength to close your press either. So I think I've got it set for medium pressure here, and you'll see that I can close my press. Great, I cannot pull this out. For heavy pressure, I want you to turn that crank until you can't actually close your press. So I turn the crank quite a few times, and now when I go to close my press, even with all my strength, I can't close it. Then I want you to turn the crank in small increments until you can close it. It's gonna require a little bit more muscle than closing a medium pressure press would, but you're still able to close it. So, there we go, I got it closed. That's heavy pressure. Tip number 4 is about pressing pillows. So a pressing pillow is something that you might use with HTV or sublimation or another garment decoration technique, and it basically raises, you basically put the pillow inside your garment or your other blank, and it raises up that pressing surface so that you can get a really flat press. A lot of times seams or buttons or zippers may get in the way of a perfectly flat press, which is really important with sublimation in particular, and it can ruin a project if you have seams and you're not getting that top platen of your heat press perfectly flat on your project. So a pressing pillow, you'll insert it inside your garment or your other blank, and it will raise up that pressing surface so that the seams fall below the pillow and you get that perfect press. But what if you don't have any pressing pillows? I actually don't have any pressing pillows right now. I am working on a very big project that required me to actually send my pressing pillows somewhere else. I'll be very excited when I can talk about this, but right now I don't have any pressing pillows, and I have found that I needed some workarounds. So I've got a few options for you. First up is the Easy Press mat or some other pressing mat. This works so well as a pressing pillow. It basically is a pressing pillow, but you may not think of it that way. This one works for smaller garments and those sorts of things, and the bigger one works for t-shirts. So if you have an Easy Press mat, that is a really easy option for a pressing pillow. I've used hand towels. So these are just white hand towels. I highly recommend using white. That is because, especially if you're doing sublimation, those temperatures get hot enough that it can leach some of the color from your towel onto your final project. Definitely don't want that. So just use a folded up towel as a pressing pillow, and this is actually a really good option. Third here, I've got some cotton quilt batting, and this worked pretty well. I'll tell you why it wasn't perfect here in just a second. But I had an infusible ink wine bag that I wanted to make, and no pressing pillow would fit inside of it. So I basically cut myself a pressing pillow, you know, about this big, and was able to use this. It worked really well, but it did sort of stick to the inside of the bag. I was able to peel it out, but it was like you could really tell that the fibers were kind of stuck to that infusible ink. It pulled out just fine, and I couldn't really find any of these fibers inside the wine bag. It's also inside the wine bag, so does it really matter? Probably not. But just know that this may stick a little bit to whatever blank you have. Maybe you want to give it a test first. Another option that I don't actually have because I don't have babies anymore is cloth diapers. I've seen quite a few people using those. White cloth diapers can work really, really well for a pressing pillow if you don't have the real thing. There's also a little trick you can use if you don't have a good size pressing pillow, and that is to hang off the edge of your heat press any zippers, buttons, or seams if you can. So this is pretty flat except for this zipper, and this zipper is nylon, and I don't really want to put that nylon zipper into my very, very hot press here. So instead, if I put this here, and then I will put my decal on top of the bag here. Now when I go to close my press, the zipper is actually hanging out of the press and I'm getting a really flat press on the actual bag itself. All right, I saved the best for last. I saw this hack on TikTok and I'm like, does it even work? Let's find out. So this is basically a hack to make weeding HTV easier. So I've set my press, like I said earlier, to 325 for 30 seconds. Now your time and temperature may vary. It will depend on how much heat the bottom platen of your heat press is gonna hold, but I found that this works pretty well. So I'm going to close my heat press and I'm gonna allow it to heat up this bottom platen, and then I'm gonna open it, and when I set my HTV down on top of that warmed platen, it becomes so easy to weed. It really is so easy. I was a little bit shocked at how much easier it is to weed than it was without this little trick. I don't think I'm ever gonna weed HTV without using this trick again. So I'm gonna go ahead and close this and then I'll show you how much better it is. While that's heating up, let me show you just how hard this is to peel. So it's not the hardest, but like it does take some effort to peel this off, right? Some of it's easier, the smaller pieces, but those kind of big chunks just take a little effort here. Just like this. You can really see how hard it can be with these larger chunks here. All right. Now I want you to be careful because this is hot. So let's put our HTV on there, and it basically is softening up the adhesive that holds it onto that carrier sheet, making this so much easier to weed. So let's go here, just like this. And the table is pretty hot, so don't burn yourself, but let's see, you can see it here, it's almost melting. But oh, it just feels so much easier. So this is my favorite hack of all 5. It's definitely easy. You can do it with basically any flat heat press you have, and it will make weeding HTV so much easier. Angie and I teamed up to give you these heat press hacks because we love to help you out. We love working with the heat press a little bit easier, but we also wanted to give a big shout out to a new course that we have created together. It's called Heat Press Roadmap, and it's designed for those of you who are looking to buy a new heat press. There are so many heat presses on the market, and one of the questions we get asked most in some of our Facebook groups is, what's the best heat press? And of course, that is a very subjective question depending on your needs, your budget, and your space. And so Angie and I have put together this course where we go through 17 different heat presses, including flat heat presses like this, mug presses, tumbler presses, hat presses, ovens, all these different heat presses that you may find overwhelming. So in our course, we go through these 17 different heat presses in depth. We talk about how to use them, we talk about the pros and cons, we make a project with each of the heat presses so you can see how it works. We also give you all of the files that we used in all of the projects as part of the course, and there's also a bunch of other bonuses. So if you're struggling to figure out which heat press to buy, or maybe you want to add another heat press to your craft room, then I definitely want you to check out Heat Press Roadmap. It's really easy to find, heatpressroadmap.com. I will also go ahead and link that below in the description. If you have any questions about any of the hacks and tips and tricks I've showed you here today, I would love to answer those in the comments. Also happy to answer any questions you have about Heat Press Roadmap. Again, if you haven't watched Angie's video, then this video will redirect over to her channel, so go ahead and make sure you watch her video. If you found this video helpful, go ahead and give it a like. I really appreciate that. If you want more heat press, Cricut, sublimation, and laser content, subscribe to my channel. I'll see you next week.